Welcome to The Fix. Sit down with copywriting experts Nick O'Connor and Glenn Fisher as they review, discuss, and improve real-world copy sent in by you. This is The Fix.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Fix. I am joined by a very special guest today in the form of Marc Lewis, who is the Dean at the School of Communication Arts 2.0 in London, in Brixton, I believe. Now, I've known about Marc for quite a while, but I've, to my shame, not been fully aware of what the School of Communication Arts, which I'm now going to call SCA, to save myself some time. I also do want to know what the 2.0 is about, so don't let me forget to ask that. But they basically, actually, rather than me rambling on, as I usually do, Marc, tell me what SCA is all about. Thank you for being on the show and thank you for your time. What's the score?
Cool. Lovely to be here. Thanks for bringing me in. As we speak, we are moving from Brixton, where you introduced us, to Shoreditch, and by the time your beautiful audience will have their ears sort of massaged by our conversation, the school will be much cooler because it will be hanging out in the ditch rather than
we're about
Brixton
in Shoreditch, are you?
Yeah, we're moving into the drum, so we are going to be part of that space. And all the opportunities that affords for us and our community. Yeah, that's really, really exciting. So the next cohort of students will have a pub inside their school because the drum has its own pub. And we're going to turn that pub into a sort of den of equality and inequity where we ask our agencies to come down with their credit cards at 5 o'clock for them to have inspirational talks. We're going to inspire great speakers in at 5 o'clock to come and chat in the pub. But our sponsors must come with their credit cards ready to buy our students drinks. And we see this as a way of sort of replicating what happened on the river banks of the Seine when tertiary education was getting going in Paris, where wealthy people would sit and speak at the riverbanks, and perhaps people would come along and bring, I don't know, a baguette, some vin du pain, and maybe some boussin. We want the same thing to happen at the drum, so we're excited about that.
Perfect. Well,
an intro, Glenn. It's great to be
what
here.
An intro. Well, I'm going to say it on camera now. Me and Nick, we like buying copywriters drinks, so we will definitely step up to the plate on that thing. And I'll bring some boursin as well.
That was a great line. That like boursin. What a line that was.
It's a good shoplifting cheese, apparently. Without
Is it? Okay. Because it's hard to put the tags onto.
Yeah, and it's packaged so you can just get it in your pocket. I don't know why I know that. It's going back to doing gigs in service stations, stopping.
There's two types of knowledge. There's knowledge we experience, and there's knowledge that we receive, a priori and a posterior. So one's going to ask themselves, is it knowledge that you've experienced, or is it knowledge that you've received?
I've received it from very close experience. I would say it's the best. Right. The only thing I've ever stolen was a packet of flaming hot jawbreakers. You know, the things that you used to suck in things, like a pack of 3 of those from the local shop in Cleethorpes where I grew up, and that racked my mind. And not telling my nana has scarred me for life from any too much illegality in that.
I'm not going to give you my rap sheet in this because I'm bound to tell you stuff that I haven't been caught for, and then it will get confusing.
Yeah, well, I spoke to James Cross actually a little while ago, and we got into the fact that he came from a line of pickpockets, which anyway, that's really a different thing. So what's going on down in Shoreditch then? What's SCA about?
Well, I went to the school in 1993 as a scholarship boy. When it was just the SCA. So you alluded to why is it SCA 2.0. I was lucky to win a scholarship in 93 when it was run by an amazing educator called John Gillard, who was the great creative educator of his era. You know, he he taught Sir John Hegarty, he taught Adam Parker, he taught Graham Fink, he taught Tiger Savage, and he taught most of these people when he was in universities like Falmouth or what was London College of Printing, later to become London College of Communication. And he loved the kids, and he loved the kids, called them cats, but he hated university. He called them shits. And he wanted to open the opposite of the university. He didn't like the focus. He felt the focus was on the wrong thing. He felt the focus was on how rather than why. Why must come much earlier than how. And he also didn't like the politics of the evening. And so just as he starts to open the SCA, he discovers he's got Parkinson's disease and he's going to eventually die of it. But anyway, the industry come together and they support this beautiful man and his beautiful vision. And the SCA was a charity. And I won a scholarship thanks to the charity of some wonderful people. And then John got very, very ill and the school closed. Just as I was leaving the school, I went to be a writer, a bad writer in South Africa. Mandela was about to get elected. And the school closed because John got very ill. And then he passed away a couple of years later. I didn't have a very good career as a writer. I'm not a very good writer. Anybody who's read my Amazon reviews for my books will attest to that. My gift, if I have a gift, was I used what I learned at the SCA to work out how to think, how to find and solve problems. And I became a .com entrepreneur. So I'm one of those like bastards that made lots of millions in the .com cycle. And I then repeated it in the early days of the mobile cycle. And I won't bore you with this story. I'll share it later if you want me to share it. It's on loads and loads and loads of podcasts. And yours is more of a copy podcast, and it's focused on creativity rather than my mental breakdown. But I had a mental breakdown, and I fell out of love with money. And this is in 2008. And I chatted to John Hegarty, Graham Fink, some of my old classmates, and we decided to reopen the school, but reopen it very differently, have a lot more emphasis on diversity, inclusivity, scholarship. Half of our students have had scholarships thanks to the generosity of the industry, but we wanted to stay honest to John's determination to raise the quality of creative education. So we've been the world's most awarded ad school every year since I run the school, in every measure, whether it's Cream, D&AD Awards won, or awards per student or whatever, if awards are important. We think they are because they help us to sell our student. So we've always had this determination to be both elitist and as inclusive as possible. And when we do that by being as close as we can to our industry, by throwing away the business model of charity because it's not sustainable, but by replacing it with a model called reciprocity. So for us, I think the best way to think about reciprocity is that we all have a responsibility to put more water back in the well than we take. If we all have that attitude that we are all going to leave our village better than we found it, then we will all rise together, then we will all have a richer harvest together. So we have solutions models that encourage organizations that are generally quite short-sighted and tight, ad agencies, to give us their money. And we can prove that that's successful because we have about 30 of the top 30 agencies and give us their money. You know how tight and short-sighted they can be. They do it because they know how valuable it is in terms of return on investment. They get access to the very best talent. They get access to the very best training. We widen participation into the industry. We raise the standards at the top, but we're also raising the standards at the bottom. So we're elevating everything. All through that spirit of reciprocity. How that plays out is industry can give us a blend of three things: money, knowledge, people. Money funds scholarships and bursaries and stuff like that. Knowledge, our curriculum is alive, it lives as a wiki, and every year I pause that wiki and I write a play, a narrative, literally in a story arc, in a rags to riches story arc that my students are going to experience. And in that play, I'm casting characters. Those are the people in the industry that are going to come and share talks and set briefs and give feedback as my students go on that rags to riches journey in the London Portfolio School. So that's the SCA 2.0. There's more underneath that, and corporate training and apprenticeship stuff coming through, and all sorts of other stuff that we could talk about. But essentially, that's the SCA.
It sounds great, and you describe it very well. And I want to dig down a little bit. You say about from the copywriting point of view, and I know people watching this predominantly are interested in that. But because I'm a selfish person, and just for my own selfish interest, and I like the philosophy that you just described of reciprocity. I can't say it. And I like the idea of all ships rising together and all of that. And I'm a big believer in it. And I wish I'd known that sooner in life. I think it's a thing that is very hard to learn and hard to enact in life. And you have to go through a series of things that are lucky to get you to that. And then you go, oh shit, I should have started that when I was earlier in that thing. I'm just interested on a purely personal, like on a almost philosophical level there. When did that come to you? Obviously, you mentioned without doing too, but you mentioned your challenges that you might have had in the personal experience. But when was that? How was that idea of reciprocity built in you? And what was how did you overcome what would have doubtless been challenges to get other people on that thought process, especially in
they're great questions. Okay, so I could tell you that the business model was conceived at a Lebanese restaurant opposite Buckingham Palace with Rory Sutherland in 2008, as I was coming out of recovery from my breakdown. And he was one of the first people that I had a social engagement with when I came back from the farm. And we vocalized it. And what we said was, look, I had spent the last 15, 20 years or so in private enterprise, making venture capitalists and myself wealthy, and I didn't enjoy what it turned me into. Don't go over old ground in other places, but the prick that it turned me into, and that I had become, if you like, a slave to venture capital. I didn't like being in that. I didn't like being on that planet. I don't respect the model of charity at all. I don't think it's sustainable. I think it's an absolute sin that there are charities that require that need our generosity, that are not supported by the safety net of the social system. That we have to have charities when taxation isn't covering those sorts of things. But I loved this third sector that was starting to gain prominence around 2008 and 2009. Around that time, if you think about some of the, I don't like the guy, but you think about David Cameron was talking about big society and stuff like that was sort of like this in the public consciousness. And Rory and I were speaking about this at the Lebanese, and we created a model called Heroes and Legends. So the first description we gave this business model, we called it Heroes and Legends. And using Rory's behavioral economics, we agreed that there should be 3 levels that you come in at heroes and legends, so that people would never choose the very lowest level. They would always sort of want to come in, and they would get benefits for the status that they would receive. A couple of things were going for me at the time. Rory was working with an amazing woman called Nicole Yersham, who was running the labs at Ogilvy, and Rory was able to do with Nicole divert some of his speaking and spectator income into a legend status at the SCA. He was also about to become the president or the chair, forgive me, Rory, his title, of the IPA that year. He was going to be the first creative to be the chair of the IPA that year. So what that then gave me was the opportunity to talk about heroes and legends to a bunch of other people, because I already had Rory Owens, John Hegarty as my first legends. And then after that, Brazier at Abermead Vickers. And, once you've got Heggs and Rory and Bray, you'd be stupid not to, because those 3 are really clever and they know what they're doing. And we don't want to be the idiot that went against what Rory and John did, because they're geniuses.
Yeah.
And so it came easy like that.
Got Brad Pitt on board rule, so we'll go into that as well and what have you. I'm just interested in because it obviously takes someone like yourself and your own personal experience to kind of trigger that, but then you get nice people in the industry like Rory who will lift it up, and yeah, it's just a really interesting lesson. So really, I'm trying to process it all in my mind, but it's really interesting. Let's go deeper into so what are we doing at the SCA? You've got students in there, they're coming in and they're basically learning the creative arts ultimately.
Yeah, what I'd like to say, so let's talk about portfolio school particularly for now, because there are so many, if you like, pieces of intellectual property that we design and deliver. But probably the one that we're most known for is portfolio school. So I'll talk firstly, or most about that, so you steer me elsewhere. Every year, as I said earlier, I write a script, a play for my students to experience, and I always write it in rags to riches because my students should always arrive. And I do that whether it's portfolio school or, incidentally, just before this call, I was writing a corporate training program for a big retailer. And again, I would write it almost always in a rags to riches framework because that student should arrive in Primark, should leave in Prada, should feel that they're going on a journey, should feel that it's their own hero's journey. So all of this stuff is inherent in how I like to design a learning experience. So at the SCA, that learning experience is broadly broken down into 3 acts, 3 terms. Act 1, term 1, we learn who we are, we learn how to think, we learn how to find and solve problems. So there's not much craft happens in term 1. It can be really frustrating for people that have maybe done English at university, or have been a copywriter, or have done fine art, or whatever. It can be really frustrating. But we need to break you down before we build you up, and we need to learn who you are, what your voice is, how to think, and also who's around you and how to bring their voices into the room, or make sure we can learn how to block their voices out when we need to. So term 1 is weird. It's a lot of that.
Weird. I'm interested in that. It sounds like a good. What kind of? You don't need to go into great depth, but what kind of things? Because I like the idea. You've got to unlearn to be able to figure out yourself is something none of us spend nearly enough time doing. But what kind of exercises are you doing with students at that stage?
Well, I'll give you an example this year. So this year, every year we could do completely differently. We have done comedy school type stuff for a while now, but this year, week 2, the very second week of the SCA, our cohort are going to be going through an experience where they learn to do stand-up comedy in a week. And on the Sunday of that week, they're performing at a mainstream comedy club. So they're going to have to learn what their voice is, how to iterate, how to present, how to do it together, how to be vulnerable, how to support each other, how to not bottle out, how to deliver on time. I mean, all sorts of great learning ended outcomes are packed in there. So that's an example of something that's happening in term 1. Mm-hmm. Something that always happens in term 1 is they hear what the story of their year is. So there's something that we teach at the school. You should be able to boil everything down to one word. Like I told you, our business model of the school in one word is reciprocity. We should be able to boil everything down into one word. Ultimately, if we can boil things down into one word, it's easier to pass somebody. It's easier for them to pass on to someone else. So in term 1, we tell students the story of the year in one word. And their job is to find a better word that becomes the name of their agency. So every cohort has a different name. Last year was Honey. The year before was Boat. The first ever cohort was called Busk. The story I gave the first ever year was Ignorance. I don't know what I'm doing. The story is ignorance. And your story as a student is ignorance. So what we're going to do this year is you as students are going to pay me what you think the school is worth. Our agencies are going to pay you what you're worth. And that's the story. Yeah, what's our agency going to be called? The students called themselves Busk, and their strapline was Tips Welcome. A couple of years later, we're starting to get in our groove. The story of the year was Confidence. We're gonna kill the industry. The name was Spank. So every year the students give themselves a name, and that comes out in term 1. And I find it quite interesting how that can often shape the behavior of a cohort in that year. So that's quite sexy. So anyway, term 1, we don't know who we are, how to think, how to find and solve a problem. Term 2, we learn what failure tastes like. We keep on getting told why we're shit. We're not being told that we're shit. We hear that we're being told that we're shit until we learn to hear properly. We're being told why our ideas are not working, why they're not on strategy, why we haven't found the right word. And it can sometimes take a long while for us to learn how to listen to feedback properly and get up and make it right. We learn how to do that just in time for award season where we enter D&AD and CAD or One Show or whatever, is when things generally start to click in the students. And then term 3 is when we build our books. We get up and we make it right. So there's like a very deliberate strategy to how we spread the energy or the focus of the year. But all of that, also, go on, you had a question.
No, you carry on. Carry on.
Oh, all of that is delivered with an intensity that would make a Bangladeshi sweatshop proud. We give our students about 170 masterclasses through the year. So if you think about what you might have had at uni, I mean, it's just on a scale that is just going to make that look ridiculous. The students are going to get about 70 live briefs through the year. So again, we're going to work them so hard. And it's that idea, there's a learning theory called Kolb's learning theory, Kolb. And what we do is we're going through Kolb's learning cycle again and again and again, where we throw information at you. We give you a moment to absorb it, to analyze it, to apply it to a brief, to get some feedback on it, to reflect on that feedback and go again. And it's like a snowball up a hill philosophy that's driving this narrative arc.
Yeah, no, it's really, I mean, I'm sold. I think it's really, what I like about it, from the sounds of it, is I believe, like, part of the reason the fix exists is we wanted to, rather than just tell you this is 5 ways you can write a better headline kind of thing, we want to sit down, look at a piece of copy, figure it out, go, right, what if it was like this? What's it trying? What's the big idea behind this? What's going on? And actually work on it. And like it, you can't cheat this industry. You have to just work hard and fail again and keep iterating until you go, that's a bit shit. Do write 50 more options until it kind of comes out, then forget it and delete it and then write it again and all this kind of stuff. That's what we build on, and that sounds like very similar to what you're. What I like is, though, as well, you've got what really is underpinning that. It's the first year is who you are. So, and the second year is ultimately the failure lesson. It's those are the factors. You can't do that stuff. You can't work hard, and you can't like iterate loads of times if you're worried. If you don't know what your voice is and you can't like riff quickly, and B, if you're worried that you're going to look stupid and you feel too vulnerable and what have, well, it's fine to feel vulnerable and be vulnerable, but if you're just having that negativity from failure, that's no good to anyone. I like the idea that you're building those 2 skills up first, and then what I was going to ask you, that third year is more the kind of practical. Okay, well, you need to go in with a book of stuff to show people.
Yeah, just to say, this is all done inside 1 year, so 3 terms, not 3 years. So
all right, okay,
term 3, so really fast, really intense. It's super condensed. The school often gets described as being a bit like a cult. For anybody that's watching this and sort of listening to this, they'll look at me and say, I am a beardy weirdie, right? I look weird. So the school's got this reputation. So there are things that we believe massively in, and one of the things we believe massively in is the word ikigai. It's a piece of Japanese philosophy made popular by a friend of mine called Marc. So I'll quickly describe what ikigai is. The word ikigai is very similar to the Greek word telos. And telos in Greek, Old Greek, simply means purpose. So the purpose of a knife is to cut. And so one of the things that we're focusing big on in term 1 is like, what's your telos? What's your ikigai? So there's no way that we think that you can have a voice and bring your voice to the industry until you've worked out what your ikigai or what your telos is. And I say that from a position of privilege, because hopefully by now you've really worked out that I massively worked out my telos, and I'm very in touch with my telos and very lucky to be. And not very many people are. It's an absolute blessing to be in touch with telos or ikigai. But this is what we have to teach. We think it's important to teach in term 1. So ikigai or telos is simply a calculation of this. If you think of it as as a confluence of four circles to make a sort of concentrated Venn diagram in the middle is a way of thinking of it, right? So the first one to think about is what do you enjoy doing? Like, what do you like? And it's not enough just to say, well, I like to be sporty. Just get deeper into that. It's like, I like to be on the left wing. So it's not enough to say, like, writing. I like to be funny. I like dialogue. I like to be persuasive. Like, what do you like? That's the first thing. It's like, what do you like? And what that's going to do is help you find something that the psychologist Csikszentmihalyi called flow when he wrote his great book, Creativity. So we know we're in flow when we spend hours and hours doing something that felt like minutes, rather than spending minutes doing something that felt like hours. And when we're doing that, we become, when we're getting feedback loops, become really good at it. So find something you really enjoy doing, become really good at it. So there you've got the two circles. And then the third bit is what the world needs. So self-explanatory. You might be thinking about the world at whole, the planet, or you might be thinking about the world of your company, your Unilever, or your Adam and Eve, or your family, or whatever. And then the final bit is, and that they can afford to give you something back for, where you can find value. So your ikigai or your telos is what you're good at, that came from that you enjoyed, that you can provide value for, and that's that bit. And if we can help you unlock that purpose, if you like, in term one, well, then it's chest out, chin up, eyes straight, all the way through all those walls that we're going to put in front of you when we tell you why your work is shit in term two, because you're prepared to do it, because you know why you're a hero, you know why you are going to save your world in term three.
That's hard. It's great, but it is hard. And I think people probably I know from experience, I know how difficult that is to be honest with yourself in that respect. I think I would recommend everybody do it. And I'm still trying to do it myself and get to that point. What do you find are the biggest challenges that you recognize, like the easy ones? I know there'll be subtleties to this, but what are the objections you most often see that are perhaps the easiest, and I say that in the biggest quotation marks, to overcome? What's the initial kind of challenge you find that students have there?
Well, great question that is. So firstly, we have an incredible selection process. So we're very, and again, I'm talking about portfolio school rather than short courses or stuff like that. We turn almost everybody away, right? So it's the opposite of uni, where you've got to take the numbers in. We've been running, it's a vanity project. I just want to be the best school in the world. And as a technology boy, I believe to get great data out, you control your data in, and you control your algorithms. So I've been describing to you some of my learning, my pedagogic philosophy in the last 10 minutes or so. My selection process is my data in. I've got a crazy selection process, which I could bore you about for hours. But nevertheless, everybody is going to go through, you're right, everybody's going to go through pain when they look into the mirror properly for the first time and try, if it's the first time at the SCA, and try to work out, who they are, what their purpose is, what their value is. And then push themselves to some limits as well, because we do push our students very hard, and it is very competitive, and you possibly, as a writer or an art director, are looking for an art director or a writer. So you are trying to make yourself look as beautiful and presentable and dateable as possible for your career, marriage, or whatever. So yeah, it's intense. We get through a lot of Kleenex. What are the challenges was your question? So our students come in different shapes and ages. So I tend not to like teenagers. I tend not to let people come into the school at like 18, 19, 20. We get one or two a year. A lot come post-grad, and a lot come as career change. They may be in their 30s or their 40s. So different challenges, I guess, will be faced with people that are at different life stages, and also different nationalities, to be frank as well. So what I mean by that, for example, is France has a very formal educational system. They're not used to calling a teacher Marc or having fun in the classroom. So we need to very quickly, there's a theory in psychology called transactional analysis, and in transactional analysis is parent, adult, child. And there's a theory Eric Byrne gave us, it should be creative, we should be a playful child. So we want the studio to be as much a playful child as possible, but the French student is mostly either in adapted child or adult state. So a challenge that we might have, for example, for a European guest would be, how do we make sure that they feel comfortable being playful child, so they feel vulnerable, knowing that there is a nurturing parent or a playful child to help them on that journey. Whereas, maybe somebody that's in their 30s or their 40s, they've got different challenges. It might be confidence, it might be time, it might be a perceived status. I think pretty much everybody, there's going to be tiredness challenges as well. Thinking is hard work. People do their best to try not to think. And our job requires deep, long, consistent, deep thought. And there aren't really very many shortcuts. It gets faster as we become more ninja, more 10,000 hours, 10-year law of Csikszentmihalyi, the Gladwell, Nick, to whatever. It does become faster, but burnout. We a big problem we have with our students is make sure that we manage their energy so that we don't kill them, but at the same time prepare them for an industry that is probably going to kill them. We push them hard because we're going to put them into an agency that's probably going to put them on 2 or 3 pictures in their first 6 months. There's a lot of different reasons why people might come needing Kleenex during the year at the SCA.
So I want to pick up on something, and I don't know how to phrase it as a question, and it's always difficult without knowing people intuitively, or rather without knowing people very well, but perhaps some kind of intuitive thing. But you mentioned about being a weirdy beardy and being weird. I've written countless articles saying the power of weird, because I consider myself somewhat weird and strange, or at least my parents have told me that, and everybody looks at me in that way. I think it's incredibly useful. It's incredibly powerful in the creative industries to be weird, and weird comes in all different shapes and sizes, to the point where sometimes it looks normal. And I think perhaps the weirdest person might be the person who just arrived in a grey suit and this thing. I think there was a
Paul Arden. Paul Arden dressed in a really smart and didn't look mad creative at all by all accounts.
Exactly. But on the spirit of weirdness, I want to link it to kind of inspiration just from you, Marc. What you've mentioned a lot of thinkers, and I can tell there's a certain you're widely read and experienced man. What is, for a very content based, be able to get those 3 LinkedIn things. But what is your inspiration? And I thought I'll give you the chance of something old and something modern. So what's those things that you go back, I used to love the Smiths or whatever, and what's the most recent thing that's been inspiring to you?
So I don't often not promote the book Future Shock by Toffler. It was the moment when my life changed, which was I always say it was the second day of the SCA, and I say that as a shortcut. It was certainly very early in my career as a student at the SCA when John Gillard brought me into the office there to be a copywriter. And he sat me down and said, "You're not going to be a copywriter, Marc." And I got 3s in an of my CSEs, so not as much of a surprise. I read much literature by the time I got to the SCA. I'd read The Sport, The Sun, The Mirror, and Readers' Wives, I think. So he sat me down and he gave me a book to read called Future Shock by Toffler. And he said, I think this will light your fire. And John was the greatest creative educator of all time. And I suppose this is an example of how great he was. That I referred earlier to our job as a school is to try and help you find your hero's journey. He helped me find mine. I always say day 2 of the school, it was certainly very, very early on. I don't know if you would have come across Alvin Toffler or read Future Shock, so no reason why you would have done. He started writing the book in 1958, and he finishes it in the late 60s. and he writes it with his wife, although she's not credited in the book. But he is the father of exponential change. He talks about, and so Toffler's law comes before things like Moore's law or similar. So he talks about, he says everything is a process, and all processes evolve, and they're all evolving faster and faster and faster. And when I read that, and I continued to, and he describes in this book, by the way, stuff like Spotify, Amazon, Netflix, incredible stuff written in, as I say, in the 1960s. And there's a line, by the way, in the book that the Toffler says that the illiterate of the 21st century won't be those who can't read or write, but those who fail to learn and unlearn and relearn. And if you think about my career as a .com entrepreneur, what I essentially was doing was working out ways of taking old economy systems and creating new processes. Think about how I've described my educational model at the SCA. I've taken traditional education and what I experienced as a student at the SCA and adapted the processes. I've taken capitalism or charity, and I found a way of finding something in the middle. So this idea that everything is a process and all processes evolve, we're always looking for a better way, that sort of applied creativity that John very generously gave me as a book to read and set me on fire, has been my fire. Well, I was at the school in 1993, so has been my fire for 30 years now, and burns bright. So that's an old one. It wasn't something new. What's new? It's inspiring me right now. I just read Humankind, which is about 3 or 4 years old as a book. It's written by a Dutch thinker, but translated into English, and translated so well. I found it an inspirational book. I mean, I know deep in my heart anyway that almost all humans, are beautiful, kind, generous people. I think almost all humans know in their hearts that almost all humans are the same as well. But for some reason we behave otherwise. For some reason we don't trust the person sitting next to us on the tube or the bus, or the politician or the teacher or the whomever. And it's really weird, because we know it's true that we're good and most of the people around us are good. So I just found this book really inspiring to be reminded that we are a phenomenal animal at most. I mean, I say this with awful things happening like that awful story in the news right now about the nerds or whatever. I get that there are outlier stories or whatever, but again, the book does a really good job of explaining that as well, how that can happen in a world where we are all supposed to be born good. So that's the thing that's inspiring me most recently. Both books. Is that lazy? Is that a bad answer?
I don't know. It's all right. It's fine. There is no right or wrong. Marc, you know.
Okay.
You know that. No, it's absolutely fantastic. And it gives me a valid excuse to buy 2 more books, which I've just moved the house and it's smaller than it was. And so I'm on a book amnesty where I'm not meant to be buying too many at the moment. But I mean, it's just not ever going to happen. But
I got to tell you, I stopped buying paper books and I only do Kindle. And it's a game changer. So first of all, what you can do is highlight. So I've got an app that saves all my highlights. So it's really easy for me to go and look at all of that. When I'm looking at highlights, I can look at what other people have highlighted. I find it really interesting when I'm reading a book to see the bits that are most salient for other readers. As a communicator, as an educator, I'm fascinated by what stands out for other people. So that Kindle version, for me, the atomized version is never going to give me that data, that insight, whereas a Kindle version is going to give me that. I have 2 Kindles. I have a Kindle Scribe, which so I can write down notes along the sides, and have a small waterproof Kindle so I can read in the bath or in the swimming pool or whatever. And it means I can have 4 or 5 books on the go, and it means I've got no problem about whether I'm in a motorhome or a tent or whatever. Everybody should get a Kindle, man. They're fucking
like a moment in your life where your first go-tos are whether I'm in a motorhome or a tent. I'm going to be one of those 2, if nowhere else. No, you're saying about hearing what other people say. I just from purely personal experience. I went through the first time. I love literature. I read a lot. I write obviously and stuff. But I went to a book club, a real life book club last night for the first time in my life. And the book we read, I didn't particularly enjoy. I realized I look at books from a very structural point of view. But it was really interesting. And I spend obviously time in copy reviews and everybody's doing that. But just in that side of my life where to get other people's take on that. And it was just another like slap, remind in the face of going, come on, Glenn, like it's everywhere. Like that, how that person interpreted that, see that vision, see that. And part of my thing is like, people shouldn't read how to do copy. They should be reading other books like that, but actually getting other people's experiences. It's interesting to hear about the Kindle thing, hearing what other people are interpreting is what we should be studying as persuaders and creatives. I'm going to call an end to it there, Marc. It's been an absolute pleasure. You mentioned earlier on things that take an hour and seem like 5 minutes and what have you. I think we're on, certainly on the, seems like 5 minutes, but I think we've been taking far too much of your time. I'm not going to give links to the school because I get the feeling that you wouldn't want anybody who would only follow a link to come to the school anyway.
So no,
if you're interested in the
you can look for us,
you can find that. But I would go there because I always find interesting, good websites quite instructive in themselves, and SCA has got one. And you can also see more of Marc's lovely home, which I was enjoying earlier on. But yeah, go and find it. That was enlightening, Marc, and I feel as though we'll have to get you on again and have different discussions. And I'd certainly like to get myself and Nick over into Shoreditch at some point and see you and come and see your students, vice versa. So thank you very much for your time, my good man. It's much appreciated.
Thanks for having me. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And we will be back very soon with another episode. Until then, I will say goodbye. Goodbye.
If you enjoy The Fix and want to get access to even more good stuff, join the Fix Accelerator today. Get access to special masterclasses from Nick and me, watch expert interviews with industry legends, join live copy feedback sessions every week, and get connected to our very own private copy network. Visit thefixaccelerator.com for more information.